This conference will now be recorded.
Good reminder. If there's no volunteers, I can go ahead and do it. I'm off camera, but I can fix that. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty
and justice for all.
It's going to take a while to get the Zoom logistics so that you can stand and have people still see you. But thank you for that. Jessica, can we roll into the roll call, please?
Yes, Planning Commissioner Alcocheri.
Present.
Planning Commissioner Smith.
Here.
Planning Commissioner Hill.
Present.
Planning Commissioner Nutbrock.
I'm here.
And Planning Commissioner Keeler.
Present.
Fantastic. Great turnout tonight. We do have on the agenda welcoming Planning Commissioner Justin Keeler, so I would like to also extend a warm welcome to Commissioner Keeler myself. And it's great to see kind of these seats filling out. And then I'll use the opportunity also to thank past Commissioner or past Chair McLean. If she's out there, I wanted to thank her for her guidance and her contribution to the Planning Commission. And also a lot of what I'm saying tonight, I copied from her, at least the good parts. The bad parts I didn't copy from her. And also Commissioner Workman, I'd like to thank him too for his work on Planning Commission as well. And I think I did mention that last time, but I just wanted to make sure I did that once more. So welcome, Commissioner Keeler. And with that, I would entertain a motion to approve the December 16th, 2021 meeting minutes. Commissioner Keeler, I know you weren't here for that one or the January one, so if you would like to abstain, that's completely fine.
I so move.
Second.
All right. Any discussion on this? Okay. We have a motion to approve December 16th Planning Commission meeting minutes. All those in favor, please say aye.
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 I'll abstain.
Commissioner Smith, are you?
Yeah, did you get that? I said aye.
Sorry. Okay. I should have probably done a roll call vote on that, but from the way it sounds like to me, we had everyone with an aye except Commissioner Keeler with an abstention. And also I'd entertain a motion for approval of January 11th meeting minutes.
So moved.
Second.
All right. Any discussion on the minutes? All right. Well, all of those in favor, maybe we'll just do a roll call to make the job easier for Jessica, who does a lot already. Jessica, do you mind doing a roll call vote on that?
Yes. Planning Commissioner Alcocheri.
Aye.
Planning Commissioner Smith.
Aye.
Planning Commissioner Hill.
Yes.
Planning Commissioner Nutbrock.
Aye.
And Planning Commissioner Keeler.
Aye.
All right. Thank you, Jessica. I appreciate that. I'm going to go ahead and open it up for public comment. Jessica, if I can have your help in unmuting anyone who would, or unmuting the guests that are here tonight. And I would just open it up to anyone who would like to make a public comment. And then Jessica, we can follow up by reading any public comments that may have come into email. Don't have it. Sorry, go ahead.
Hi, this is Dinah McLean. Can you hear me?
Yes, welcome back. I was talking good about you, and you know what? And it paid off.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I just wanted to say I wanted to thank the City of La Center and the Planning Commission, both commissioners, both past and present, for the opportunity to serve on the Planning Commission. I've learned a lot in the past 10 years, both from my mistakes and from my successes. I hope that the Planning Commission will continue to serve the people of La Center with vision and integrity. I also hope that the decisions you make embrace the views of its current citizens and take into consideration the needs of its future citizens, both young and old. With global environmental changes quickly affecting the world, we need creative solutions which include green initiatives as well as open spaces to maintain La Center's small town charm. Now is the time for new ideas and thinking outside of the box. I hope you are up to the task. I look forward to watching the city's progress, and we'll try to provide my input from time to time. So thanks again. I've really appreciated being on the Planning Commission. So thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dinah.
And all the support too from all the commissioners. So
Thank you very much. Any other public comment at this time? All right, just give it another 10 seconds here to see if someone would like to unmute and give a public comment. All right, so moving on. We at this time have no public hearing to open, so we'll move right into 1.8, which is unfinished business with the parking code update. And Ethan, thanks for all the hard work and taking what we were talking about over the last meeting or maybe two and doing the red line for us. Maybe if I could have you take this part on at this time and continue to guide us on what we need to do here to move this along.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Alquasheri. And I just want to spend a couple of minutes tonight giving you a staff report about the city's parking code update. This is the second month that the Planning Commission has discussed this issue. And so during last month's meeting, we talked with you about different aspects of the city's existing parking code, and we provided some information to you about other local parking codes in Ridgefield, Camas, and Washougal, just as kind of a point of comparison. And so that resulted in a number of different recommendations that we went over with you last month. And this month, what we're going to be doing is talking to you about a red line draft of the code, which is just kind of an initial discussion draft of the code. And so I'll kind of walk you through some of those changes. And then, of course, as always, it's meant to be a discussion, so you don't have to hold your questions or anything like that until the end. Just feel free to raise your hand or interrupt me, and then we can handle it as those questions come up. So the first thing that we did is create a purpose statement for the code. And the existing off-street parking code does not include a purpose statement, so we thought it would be helpful to have one for a couple of reasons. One, just to call out what La Center's overall philosophy is on parking. But then also to provide a basis for the regulations that we're recommending to you tonight. So that purpose statement that's in the red line draft talks about being consistent with recommendations provided by the Planning Commission that we talked about last month. And so the purpose statement talks about emphasizes providing adequate parking in close proximity to each use within La Center, and but also providing flexibility to businesses and property owners in La Center. And that was a key point that we talked about with you last month, and that Planning Commission raised, was not only providing adequate parking, right sizing parking for the city, but also providing some flexibility for businesses, because each business has an individual situation. So that's what's captured in the purpose statement that we drafted. Are there any questions, comments about the purpose statement?
I think it's good, Ethan.
I like it.
Okay. Very good. So we'll move on. We also developed an applicability section, and this is something else that was missing from the existing parking code. So it's been difficult in the past in individual situations to know when the parking code applies. I think it's obvious to everyone that when new uses are proposed, if there's a new commercial development, then that commercial development is required to comply with the city's code and provide parking at that time. But some of the situations that weren't clear and that are worth including in the code in terms of when the parking requirements are triggered are when there's an expansion of an existing use. So, if an existing use adds on, then it's important to capture what those new parking requirements for that expansion area are. Otherwise, you can end up in a situation where a given use is underparked, and then that results in overflow of vehicles into adjacent areas. And then another item, another applicability statement that we added is that when the code will apply when construction value is 80% of the existing site and building valuation. And so that's not necessarily an expansion, but if somebody remodels their business, for instance, and perhaps a new tenant moves in, then they, at that point, it's important to check the parking as well, because that might generate the need for additional or different parking requirements. And then a couple other statements when a new parking lot is constructed. And so sometimes, for instance, the city might in the future construct a parking lot downtown, a public parking lot, and then the landscaping and design standards would come into play at that point, even if there was no particular use associated with that parking lot. So that's another important scenario to capture. And then finally, when there's a change in the use that increases the need for on-site parking by more than 10%. So, especially in the case of businesses, buildings and tenants routinely change out of those buildings. And so it's important to just check parking at that point in time before tenant improvements or building permits are issued, so that there's adequate parking for each use. Okay.
Ethan, a question.
Go ahead.
In C there, where you talk about building valuation, is the method for that evaluation well established within the planning community? Is it clear what that means?
No, that one's a little bit more of a, art and practice, I guess you'd say. And so you might remember there was some discussion last month that I think Commissioner Smith brought this up, that we should possibly look at triggering the parking code when there's a change in value, and that should match what's in the downtown overlay code. So that's where that came from. I wouldn't say that that's common or standard across jurisdictions, but I think it's an important scenario to capture.
Yeah, I agree. I just want to make sure we're not creating more problems down the road for you or your successor on how you evaluate, the building valuation, and whether we need something more specific. But I'll let you think about that. Then the last one where we talk about an increase of 10% is, so if there's a new use, well, my question is 10% of what? Is that 10% of the existing parking spaces, or is that 10% over what the current code would require for the previous use? It's not real clear how you would apply that 10%.
Yeah, I mean, that's a really good question too. And so it says an increase in the need for parking spaces by more than 10%. And so I guess, you know, as a new use comes in, really all you have in front of you, unless the city has the file for the previous application, really all you have in front of you is the existing code, you know. So for instance, maybe something changes over from a doctor's office to a grocery store or something. You can evaluate, okay, here was 10,000 square feet of doctor's offices, and now here's 10,000 square feet of grocery store, and here's the change in parking requirements that generates. So really, most of the time, it would end up being a comparison against the existing code in both cases.
That's kind of what I thought would make sense. It would probably be the easiest way to do it. Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on the applicability statements in the code? I can see Commissioner Keeler straining to read this. I don't know, Jess, it might be good to zoom in just a little bit if we can on this, because we're really just going to be going section by section anyways.
I have it zoomed in on my computer. I just have bad eyes, and there's no amount of correcting that's going to make them better.
You can associate with that.
Thank you.
Okay, we added a general requirements section as well. You know, that's yet another section that the existing code does not have. And so, you know, this kind of contains a little bit of a hodgepodge of requirements, but it talks about permitting process, what happens when there's more than one use. It talks about landscaping a little bit, and then the limitations on the use of parking spaces. So you can't put materials or park mobile homes or RVs or boats in those spaces. So those are some important general requirements that we thought would be added. Some of those would be helpful to capture, and some of those came from the city's existing code, and some of those came from the example codes that we looked at. Any questions on that? Okay. So the next section then is kind of the heart of the parking code, I guess, if you will. It's the parking code quantity requirements that talk about the amount of off-street parking that's required. And that's one section that we did not finish. We're still trying to independently verify and check what parking requirements should be per use. And, you know, we'll probably be looking, or we will be looking at other jurisdictions' codes just to see how much parking they're requiring for individual uses, residential, commercial, office, so forth, public uses, as just kind of a basis for calibrating what needs to go into La Center's code. But what I'm really trying to do is get my hands on what's called the ITE Parking Generation Manual, and that's an annual survey that's put out by the Institute of Transportation Engineers that look, you know, that counts. They go around counting the amount of parking that is amount of cars that are parked at different uses, and then they report those results, and they update you know, at least a few uses every year. And so I'd really like to be able to calibrate when we set a standard, have a basis for saying, okay, this is typically how much parking is required for these uses in different, all across the country in different places. I think that's a better place to start from than just looking at other jurisdictions' codes, because we don't necessarily know how out of date the parking requirements are in other jurisdictions' codes. Although, as I said, we'll still do a little bit of comparison of that with other jurisdictions. There was some changes though to this section. We included some provisions at the bottom of that section pertaining to, essentially some notes about the quantities at the end of the parking table. So those additional provisions establish a maximum number of spaces in the mixed use and junction plan zoning districts at 125% of the minimum requirement. And that's a discussion that we had with you last month about establishing a maximum in those two zoning districts. And then setting up a process to reduce the minimum parking requirements by up to 15%, the minimum off-street parking requirements, by giving credit for on-street parking in downtown. And we did, we are recommending language that expands that credit area in downtown to the entirety of the downtown, rather than just those blocks that we talked about last week that are kind of in the center of downtown. So that area is expanded. That's consistent again with the discussion that we had last month. And then the other way to reduce the off-street parking requirements would be to provide bicycle parking. And that's something that a lot of jurisdictions do. And so we took a shot at that and indicated that for every 3 bike parking spaces provided, you can reduce the off-street parking requirements by 1 space. So that's kind of the balance that we tried to strike there. A more commonly used reduction strategy, or I guess ratio, is for every 5 bicycle parking spaces to reduce by 1 vehicle parking space. That's what City of Vancouver's code does, and I think that's what City of Richfield's code does also. But in my experience, including a project I'm currently working on in Vancouver, you end up having to provide just too much bicycle parking for it to really be an incentive to reduce the vehicle parking. We are suggesting putting a cap on the amount of total reduction that you can get from providing bicycle parking. So you can't reduce more than 5% for that one, for that one thing for providing bicycle parking. And that's consistent also with the discussion last month. I think Commissioner Smith and the other planning commissioners said, they'd be okay with having a credit to reduce off-street parking requirements for providing bicycle parking, but limiting it to a relatively small amount, 5%. That would be okay, is what we heard. So I'll stop there again, and then are there any questions about the parking quantity requirements, which aren't finished yet, or the available reductions and how those work?
Ethan, I assume you're going to step through the red line code.
Yeah, maybe it's just better. I was just thinking about that, Jess, if we can go to the red line code itself, I think it's probably going to be easier.
Because I want to clarify comments on the red line code.
Okay.
That'd be page 29.
Yeah, and so keep scrolling down. Jess, below this until you get to 18.280. Okay, there we go. Yeah, those are the reductions right there below the quantity table. So if we can maybe zoom in on the red lines there.
Can we go back up to the paragraph of general requirements?
Are you referring to the section that Ethan was reading from, not in the red line code?
No, the red line code 18288, paragraph 030, general requirements.
It's up above where you're at here, Jess. Keep going up.
Yeah, right there.
There we go. Thank you.
So, on subparagraph 2 there, it talks about the justification for reducing the number of spaces. Should we also consider the justification for going above the maximum that we've set of 125? In case
You
there's
said
some
provision 2 that talks about the variances. Is that what you're?
Yeah, it's number 2 there. It says deviations in the standard requires a variance, but this talks about justifying a reduction. You know, we do set a maximum also. Would there be a case where we'd want to give a developer the chance to argue that he needs more than that maximum?
Yes, we should do that. Thank you for catching that.
And it all has to be justified by traffic analysis, so I think we could go either way.
You know, what I'm inclined to do is make this a little bit more general.
Yeah.
And say that that deviations from the standards of this chapter requires a variance review under 18260 period, and then say when reductions or maybe say when changes in the amount of parking required are proposed, then it has to be accompanied by a parking analysis from a traffic engineer.
Yeah, that would be good. And then on number 3 below that, we talk about, in essence, joint use. And here we say that it has to meet the total requirement, but we do have a paragraph later, .050, that talks about specific joint uses where you can reduce the total requirement if the businesses deconflict their peak periods. I would think that paragraph would fit better here to be all inclusive of that joint use requirement kind of thing.
You're talking about paragraph 3 there?
Yes.
Well, this is really talking, yeah, I mean, you could go either way on that, I guess. This is really talking about the quantity requirements when you have a mix of uses, and that could be a mix of uses either in a single building or across a site. And so I suppose that we could take this, which I think is what you're suggesting, right? Take this provision number 3 here and put it down in joint parking.
Or just put joint parking up here. Because, you know, what we say in joint parking is if 2 businesses can deconflict their peak parking requirements in time, they don't have to meet the total maximum. So that seems to go with this paragraph where we say, if you got joint uses, you have to meet the total requirement for those individual uses.
Yeah, okay. I think that probably works fine to do it that way as well.
Take a look at that, see what you think.
Okay.
And then number 2 talks about, not storing vehicles or materials. But it only applies to LDR 7.5. Why don't we include MDR 16 there also? That last sentence.
Yeah, I'm seeing that. Yeah, that would make some sense.
What number are we on now?
Sorry, we're on number 5. I think, Dennis, you may have said number 2, but last sentence of item 5 there.
Okay, gotcha.
Bye.
And then just if you could scroll down to the next set of red lines. Yeah, right there. In B, you include in that list of vehicles boats, but for some reason you don't include boats in C. Is that just an oversight?
Yes.
And then, so C says you can park it between the front property line as long as they're not parked in front of the primary facade of the building. Does that mean the garage also? I mean, is the garage, can you park those things in the driveway if they're in front of the garage? And does the garage considered part of the primary facade?
I would think so.
Yeah, if it's a front-facing garage and not one of the side-facing ones, maybe.
I mean, this would seem to indicate that you can't park those things in a driveway, right? And this is one of the things that we borrowed from the existing code. So long as they are not parked between the front lot line and the primary facade of the dwelling. That's a little unclear. I mean, I guess I would advocate that those things should be able to be parked in driveways in front of garages, and then, as a standard that the city would regulate. And then if a homeowners association wants to say you can't have your RV, boat, recreational vehicle, whatever, motorhome in front of your parked in your driveway, then they can do that. This is really basically taking those things off street and saying that you can't park them right in front of your house is kind of what it's trying to say. So a little bit of a mystery what they were trying to do here.
I don't think they want you sticking out in the street.
What's that?
They don't want you sticking out in the street or over the sidewalk.
Yeah, I think that's part of the intent of it.
Right.
Or it just kind of reads like they don't want it in the yard anywhere other than the driveway.
Yeah,
if that's what we want, let's say that more directly.
Yeah, the way I think about it is if we read it as where can you put it? Like I would read it as the side yard, the backyard, driveway on the side of the house. That those that go around the side.
That's the way I read it too. I thought you could park it beside the house as long as it's behind the front of the house.
Right. And are we loosening the existing law now? Because I actually I didn't read the existing law on this piece.
No, this is pretty much exactly what it says.
Well, over here in Riverside, I know there have been several new residents that have put ugly boats and utility trailers in the driveway. And I think it was the city required them to be moved. But again, it could have been the HOA. So
There's another little point. This is maybe outside of like our scope, but a lot of the older communities, well, not a lot, a couple that I know of don't have HOAs at all.
Right.
So just a consideration.
Well, and so I guess I'm wondering where the line is here in terms of what the city should regulate versus what it shouldn't. If somebody has a boat, like and they have a house in the older part of town, maybe there's no other available space for them to park it except in their driveway or something. Is that we're saying don't do that?
I'm thinking if it's not allowed now, that we would just keep that until it was maybe brought to, until there's a complaint about it.
Yeah, so, and then just to clarify, we're saying that they can't, because there's different ways to read this. On one of those ways, it says the primary facade of the dwelling. I mean, that could include the garage, the facade, or maybe it doesn't include the garage, but we're saying don't park it in the driveway in front of the garage, right?
That would be my vote.
Yeah, I think it matches what the law is now, but then maybe we're just clarifying the language so it's very clear. I think the reason, and I think the reason why there's that caveat in there is that there are those driveways that run all the way down the side of a house. And so technically past that, like that front line of the house, it's like in your side yard in the driveway.
Yeah, some people put those in for boats or RVs, right?
Right.
Okay, that's understood. I'll alter the language here to be more clear.
And Ethan, I know you don't have the table ready yet, but just a general comment on these. One of the issues I've had is in the definition of single family attached dwelling units and duplexes. In my mind, single family attached dwelling units include everything from 2 duplexes up to, you know, townhomes. Is that generally accepted?
Well, so I think maybe last month we talked a little bit about standardizing the terms used across the code. Is that what you're saying here?
Well, but like the first line there, you've grouped single family detached with duplex, and then the next line is single family attached.
Yeah. I mean, that's the nomenclature that the code uses. I mean, there's a little bit of a variety there across jurisdictions. And so I think it's because the existing code uses single family detached and duplexes. I was just kind of sticking with that here. I mean, somebody might say, well, a duplex is kind of like an attached dwelling, single family attached, but that's the nomenclature that the existing code uses. So single family attached would then be 3 and above.
Okay, I'll give that some more thought.
Ethan, a question on this parking of the recreational vehicles in the driveway. And again, as Sharon indicated, there are some homes, some areas that do not have CC&Rs, others that do. But I'm thinking of situations where we have people, I know that now, that have motorhomes or boats, and they have them parked actually off-site as far as storage. Then they bring them onto their property to either clean, do things to them in preparation perhaps for taking them either back to storage or taking them on vacation or whatever. This is not going to disrupt that, is it? If I'm reading this correctly, we're not suggesting that they can't do that.
yeah, I mean, people in my neighborhood do that too. And so, I mean, I think we need to be reasonable and allow people the opportunity to bring their RV home and clean it, or their boat home and clean it. And so, I mean, perhaps maybe 2 weeks is too long, but perhaps we use that same 2 weeks and say you can't park it in front of your house for more than 2 weeks. I would think that would be more than an ample amount of time.
Absolutely, absolutely. But so there's no language in here though that right at this point, or is there language in here that prohibits that? I don't think there is.
Well, in that item C, it could be interpreted that if you're not supposed to park in front of your house, you're never supposed to do it for any amount of time. And so I guess what I'm suggesting is that maybe we do need to change that and specify that you shouldn't park for more than, say, 2 weeks in front of your house. Park those types of vehicles for more than 2 weeks in front of your house.
I think something like that's appropriate because again, people who have recreational vehicles have those oftentimes before they move into our community, and they move in our community knowing, with the intent or with the hopes that they can continue to utilize those vehicles and not somehow be hamstrung. It says why we move here where we can't even wash or clean or load or whatever our recreational vehicle. So I think we do need to have some language in there that gives some latitude there.
Yeah.
Doesn't B cover that? It says you can park them in the street for up to 2 weeks.
What about your driveway, though, Dennis? Like, if somebody puts their RV in their driveway, should we allow them to clean it for 2 weeks?
I think so. I mean, if they got room in their driveway, I'd much rather see them have it in the driveway, and I think they would too, rather on the street. But that's not always applicable. My 40-foot RV that I had, fortunately, I had a parking spot for it, but others don't. And the only place for it is in front of your home. But there are other vehicles that are perhaps 23, 24 foot, 20 foot that they can pull in the driveway, and oftentimes that's more convenient for them to do whatever they need to do. So I think we need to have latitude both ways. You're right, Dennis. I think 2 covers that, but I think we ought to be sure that somehow that doesn't that also covers the fact that they can also put it in their driveway if that works for them.
Yeah.
And it doesn't work for everybody.
I agree, Dennis.
Might be able to fix that by at the end of that sentence on C, not park between the front line and the facade of the dwelling, with exception to periodic or necessary short-term maintenance and loading, unloading, or something like that. That'll work.
You have the thoughts on that, Ethan? Can you wordsmith that?
Yeah, I'll work on that. Sorry, I was just writing what Sharon said so I can remember that.
And I think the only other thing I just have to throw in there is you always run into the issue of enforcement and how this comes to the knowledge of the city. And so that maybe is a different discussion, but it's like, hey, it's been, 2 weeks, one day, I'm the neighbor, I'm complaining.
Right. Well, yeah, I was going to say something to that effect. I mean, would be very difficult to enforce this, because unless somebody provides some kind of documentation that it was there 15 days, then who's to say who's right and who's wrong and all that sort of stuff. So it would be pretty difficult to enforce. But I suppose, that if somebody was doing it, egregiously or perpetually, then at that point it might be a little bit more obvious.
My experience, since I'm an RV owner for 20 years, I have seen more often than not that individuals who either have boats or motor homes or whatever, or trailers, have in fact talked to their neighbors and have and let them know and pretty much have got the the thumbs up from them that they recognize that it's going to be there, and please uh, just know that I'll be moving it. It's not and such. So I don't know of any situation I've been aware of that someone said no way you can do that. Everyone's been very polite about it and supportive. So I think we're good there.
Okay. All right. Any other comments, questions on the general requirements or the section dealing with required amount of off-street parking?
Down below the table, I've got a comment.
Okay. Jess, if you can scroll down below the table there.
The first section of red lines below the table. Yeah, 4B there, talking about the downtown special credit area. My question or my comment centers around, okay, we're going to let 10% of the requirements be met by off-street parking. Over time, I can see us getting into a position where we would overcommit our off-street parking. How do we prevent that? If every business comes along and says, I'm going to fill my requirements with 10% off-street parking, how do we prevent from overcommitting our off-street or our on-street parking?
I mean, I guess number one, it's limited to 10% within 300 feet. So the distance requirement helps a little bit. The other thing is it's only in downtown. So unless you started seeing, quite a bit more development, I would think that the amount of on-street parking, and I think we talked about this last week a little bit, that folks aren't seeing parking overcommitted, as it is right now. I think that the amount of on-street parking will remain sufficient for quite a while until the city starts seeing more development. So, I guess I kept it purposefully general because I didn't want to get into a situation where people were having to do parking studies to justify that there was, that available amount of on-street parking, because that sort of goes against the flexibility objective that we kind of laid out last month. So that's kind of that's the balance I tried to strike there, is just allowing for it to happen, but limiting it to no more than 10% per use, and saying that it can't be more than 300 feet away, are kind of the primary controls there. And then someday the city might have to consider something else, or just do away with it altogether if for some reason on-street parking starts filling up. Okay. So I don't know if that's a completely satisfactory answer, but that's...
Yeah, I'm fine with that. I guess when we run into that problem, like you said, we can come back and change it. Hopefully we'll run into that problem sooner than later.
Ethan, in regards to that, picking up on what Dennis said there, where do we have in this code here, in that situation where, again, we may need to respond to a business owner with that has an issue with B here? Is that something that comes back to you as the city planner, or how, and for you then to deal with that and take that either to the planning commission or the council for some variance or adjustment or whatever? Do we have that somehow clearly identified if there is an issue downstream, hoping that there won't be? We've got that covered.
So when you say an issue, you mean a business who doesn't have enough parking, or wants to reduce and shouldn't reduce or something, or?
Yeah, either one of those situations.
So, I mean, I guess this is part of kind of striking the flexibility and right sizing the parking for the city, is just that these reductions that you're looking at here would allow for a reduction of 15% outright, you know, so somebody doesn't really have to jump through a whole lot of hoops to demonstrate that they should be able to reduce by 15%, and the 15%, you know, includes the 5% for bike parking. Beyond that, they would have to they would have to go through a variance to reduce further than that, or to change any other standard in the code, like, you know, landscaping or something like that. It's, you know, that's why it's important when a use changes to assess the amount of parking that's required at that time, so that you are applying the right amount of, or requiring the right amount of parking at that time. So I guess let me know if that answers the question, but that's some general thoughts for you on how that works.
Okay, thanks, Ethan.
Any other comments on questions on this language here in front of you?
Yeah, I've got one on the next page towards the bottom. Paragraph about location at the bottom of the next page. Yeah, 300 feet is measured from the nearest point of the parking facility, nearest point of the building. You know, since I think we're trying to orient this for pedestrians, I would think it'd be 300 feet to the public entrance of the building. You know, I could see somebody meeting this requirement by putting a parking lot behind the building, and you're 600-700 feet from the entrance. So I just throw that out there for consideration.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I disagree with that.
I think it does definitely allow for parking to be quite far away, and we're still talking about off-street parking. A couple things. I know kind of the spirit of that number from our last meeting was around the idea that we didn't want to turn away a potential business from coming in to the center, which we need. And then the second thing is, and I think this might have been a comment I made last time, is that like for instance, we had the farmers market over the summer at the church, and the downtown area seemed to be fairly resilient in like accommodating a lot of parking. Of course, and folks walked a lot farther than the 300 feet, but that's kind of a different scenario. But it seems like it can absorb quite a bit, because those farmers markets were quite packed.
Okay. Should we move on to the next section? It's probably a good time to do a little bit of checking in on the time, 7:30, so we're an hour into it. Do you want to keep going on parking, or do you want to talk about archaeology a little bit this month? Archaeology probably won't take more than, it's kind of an introduction to the topic, so that probably wouldn't take more than about 30 minutes.
I think I've just got one more comment, Ethan. Down in the middle of the next page. Number 5 there, the back out prohibition. My question was, can you arrange the parking so you can drive out forward? You're saying you not back out, but can you arrange it so you can drive out, in a forward direction. Is that acceptable?
How is
So-
that different?
So that would mean that they'd have to back into the space off of the public road too, I think.
Yeah, this prohibits backing out into a street. Does that mean it's okay to drive forward onto a street?
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm not completely following what the request is here.
Commissioner Norcroft, the way I read it, sorry to cut you off. The way I read it is that it's so small that you can't maneuver in the parking area. And so you, like, literally to get out, you'd have to back out of that spot into the main road. But you probably read it that way too.
Well, I think what it's designed to prohibit is, in some cases, commercial or industrial uses might have commercial, industrial, or multifamily uses might have pull-in spaces off the public street. So they're basically saying you got to limit that to no more than 5 residential dwelling units, and then all commercial and industrial developments. So you can't have off-street parking, meet your off-street parking requirements with pull-in parking, off head-in parking, angled parking off of the street. It's essentially saying you've got to have an off-street parking lot that's separated from the street, unless it's below that threshold.
So if you had, in a residential area, you had a row of townhomes that exceeded the number here, what is it, 5? You couldn't just have a driveway in front of each of those townhomes? See, I think this requirement ought to apply to mention the classification of streets. I would think this would be okay. You could back into a residential street, but certainly not an arterial or a feeder. And I think those things are already covered in the engineering standard, if I remember right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's probably a good idea to adjust this as you're suggesting, and make it consistent, or sorry, make it tie it to the street classification.
That's a really good point now that you say it that way. Yeah, like a residential street, we kind of do that all the time. But yeah, like a public street or something bigger would definitely be problematic there.
Right, and so are we saying though, are you suggesting removing some of the references to uses or in the thresholds, like the 5 or more dwelling units?
Well, I guess I'd like to see what the engineering standard has, because I know right now, I think the engineering standards prohibit having, residential units that access an arterial. They have to be accessed through an interior streets and a main entrance. And I don't know how far the engineering standard goes in that, but we got to look at that and be consistent with that. I agree in concept. We don't want to be backing vehicles out into busy streets. But I'm concerned here about this would prohibit townhomes in a residential area from having driveways that back onto a residential street.
Yeah, I mean, typically townhomes have parking in the back, right? I guess in some cases they don't. A little bit of each, maybe.
And then they kind of have like a parking lot, if you will, in other townhome communities. But
yeah, I
could totally see where you're going with that, though.
I know a couple of townhouse developments in downtown La Center that are 4plexes, and so they would comply with this requirement because it's not 5 or more, and they can back out onto the street. But yeah, I think the comment about the classification is a valid one, and then perhaps raising the threshold to more than 5. You know, maybe as many as 8 or something like that. I don't know if there's a magic number there. Brian, do you have any experience with that?
Sorry, I had to find my mute button. No, I agree that tying it to the classification of the street makes good sense, but we can certainly put our heads together and come up with some thoughts on that one.
Okay. So other comments on this section?
I guess this is Dennis, Ethan. I guess my question is, if we were to make that 5 or 8 or whatever, is the intent of this, or is this trying to somehow cause the developer or builder to then put together a parking area next to or adjacent to these dwellings so that that situation of backing into the street would not occur? Is that kind of what this is kind of forcing to have happen?
I mean, I think it's forcing them to do that, or to have parking in the back and in the garages.
Or parallel parking, perhaps, huh?
Off of an alley. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if parallel parking would work because that's on-street parking that can't really be meeting the off-street parking requirements. But I think it would be putting the parking in the back off of an alley with a garage facing the alley or a driveway facing the alley, or coming up with an off-street parking area that serves, you know, multiple units and buildings and so forth.
I could see this one if the developer, I can see him down at your office knocking, saying, "What paperwork do I fill out to get a variance? Here's my plan." So, okay.
Okay. Any other comments on this one, or should we move on?
I'm good.
I'm good.
Thank you.
Okay. So I guess just a couple quick notes. I included some other code sections that aren't really kind of the heart of the parking code, but related to some changes that we said we would make. So the MDR 16 code, there's a requirement in there that says that MDR 16 development shall provide 1.75 parking spaces per unit. I'm getting rid of that requirement because we're going to have a requirement in this code that establishes the number of parking spaces required by unit type. And then there wouldn't be a need to have that in the MDR 16 code. I think we've talked about that before. There's an inconsistency in that code versus what's in this parking code. And then there's also, we've included 18.245, so, you know, real minor change in 18.245, which is the landscaping code. And we talked about landscaping islands and how often a landscaping island needs to occur. And so we kind of looked at what other jurisdictions were doing, but we also noted that there's inconsistent requirements across the center's code. And so the existing landscaping code says that you've got to have a landscaping island in an off-street parking area every 7 spaces, and they've got to be evenly distributed across the off-street parking area. Most jurisdictions use something higher than that. Camas uses 15 spaces every 15 spaces. Ridgefield is every 20 spaces. And then within the center's own code, if you look at the mixed use zone, it says no more than 12 spaces, and the junction plan zone says an island every 20 spaces. So I guess I'm suggesting sort of picking something higher than 7. Maybe 15 to 20 seems a little too high to me, so I picked 12. And that's a number that's, you know, already in the mixed use code. So we would sort of standardize that requirement across the code instead of having differing requirements. So we would take that requirement out of the mixed use code and out of the junction plan code, and it would just be the same and, you know, all across the city. I don't particularly see a need to have different requirements in different zones. It seems like something that's can be fairly standard across across zones. So those are a couple.
I think when we consider the junction, though, I visualize much larger parking lots than we have in a mixed use or a downtown zone. And so if we're thinking that the junction is going to have much larger parking lots, maybe it makes sense to have, you know, more spaces between dividers would be my only input.
I would agree.
Would 12 be very hampering at the junction? So if you wanted to keep a consistent number, 20 makes sense for the junction, but maybe 12 would hamper it. But I do love the drive to simplification as well.
Yeah, I was trying to standardize it because I didn't see a particular reason why parking lots should be designed differently across the city. I mean, the idea behind the junction is a more pedestrian oriented mixed use environment. You know, so if anything, you might want more landscaping in those areas. So I was trying to pick kind of a one size fits all standard. I mean, we could leave the standard that's in the junction zone as it is, but then, you know, outside of the junction zone, it would be 1 every 12 or whatever number we pick, maybe 12, somewhere between 12 and 15, I think I would suggest. So those are kind of my thoughts on that. I'd be okay leaving it in leaving the standard in the junction zone as it is.
Yeah, I'm not hard over on this. That was my rationale. If we think standardization is more appropriate here, I'm okay with that.
And I think 7 is definitely too small of a number, but 12 does make sense.
I like 12 too, but I also just recognize the fact that if a developer comes in and I kind of can visualize that potentially at the junction, and it makes more sense, and even for aesthetics, whatever, that it's 20 or whatever, that they could certainly come forward and say, let me show you my landscape layout for the parking lot, and this is what I'd like to do. And it's a little bit different than what the code calls, can I get a variance on that? There's ways to make that happen. So I'm comfortable with the fact that, and I think you've got a good point there, Ethan, to somehow let's have it consistent across the city, but have options, again, opportunity for developers, builders to ask for a variance in their particular situation and not make it for everyone. So I'm good with 12.
Ethan, should in chapter 280, should we reference this section of 245 just to make that tie, or is that necessary?
No, I think that is probably a good idea because it could be overlooked.
Maybe somewhere up in the general requirements.
Say that again.
Maybe in the general requirements section.
And I think I actually did say that, if I remember right.
But I was going to throw out also.
Oh, yeah, never mind. I see it now. You're right.
I was going to throw out, I'm comfortable with 12 as well, but I also wanted to be a good chair and make sure that I'm incorporating everyone. So Commissioner Smith, Commissioner Keeler, do you guys have any thoughts? I've been doing a lot of the talking.
This is Jeremy. I think that you guys have done a great job covering it, so I've enjoyed listening along. Thank you.
Absolutely.
12 seems reasonable to me, Mr. Alkashari.
Excellent. Thank you.
So just to recap what I'm hearing, we want one standard of 12 across the city, flexibility for developers to vary from that in individual circumstances with using a variance process. Okay.
Ethan, one of the things, again, I think that I would hope as we continue to move forward here, that as we make changes to our code, that it becomes pretty clear, hopefully to developers and builders, that we're pro business, pro development, and we don't want to discourage them in coming to our city and building whatever they have in mind. Hopefully we can, that's hopefully the message that'll come across to them, that we're not somehow locking them out because we're so restrictive in our code. And I've heard that from a number of people along the way too. So I think we're on the right track here. We're on the right track.
Ethan, I guess I did have another comment. Down in the multi-family parking lot section.
Yeah, so I was going to start talking about that next.
Okay, go ahead.
So Jess, if you'll scroll down below the loading section here, I mean, the first thing I would say is that loading should be at the end of this chapter, and so we shouldn't go from parking then to talking about loading and then back to parking again. Now, I struggled a little bit with the section, as you can see, on multifamily parking lots and circulation, because I think a lot of this stuff is specific to the MDR 16 zone. And I think that if we think that there's good standards in here, but that they're specific to MDR 16, then they should go in the MDR 16 code, because this off-street parking section I view as being applicable to the entire city. So if there's zone specific standards, it should go in the zone, in the individual zones. But I kind of tore this section up because I didn't completely understand everything that was in it. But I'm going to let Dennis throw his comment out, and then we can maybe start from there.
Well, I guess the title of this section is multifamily, but subparagraph 3 there specifically mentions individual dwelling units. And my thought was that subsections 3 and 4 should apply to LDR also. I mean, those requirements about not having direct access to arterial or collectors, that applies equally well to LDR. And so I think that ought to be a general requirement, not just MDR 16.
Well, I think it's certainly in the case of arterials, I think it's a good idea to limit access to arterials. Brian and I were in a pre-application meeting today when they that involved a requirement to put a collector street through the development, and I think we want them to be able to access collector streets, right, Brian? So I don't know that I would throw collectors in there with this, even though they're sort of a higher classification street than a local access street.
Yeah, we definitely want to limit access onto arterials. I'm still learning all of our engineering standards here, but my recollection is that certainly on the minor collectors, it was allowable to have driveway access directly off of those. And I believe that's the case also for major collectors.
Okay.
So, so what this should say is that acts that these type of projects, and Dennis, you're suggesting LDR 7.5 as well, shouldn't have direct access to an arterial street, but we would strike collector because we do want to allow that.
So you're saying that we would allow individual residential driveways to access collectors?
Yep.
I'm reviewing the standards here, seeing if I can find that section in the engineering standard.
I think that's what I heard from the meeting today, but I mean, if you think about it, Dennis, and not to interrupt you, but it's almost impossible, especially when you're dealing with a larger development, to have only local access streets. And so then if you have a collector street, are you saying that all the houses have to back up, have their backyards against that collector?
I need to review the definitions of collectors. I know we've got a list of all the collector streets in the center. I need to go find that, and I'll reserve judgment until I look at that.
Okay. Brian and I will do a little bit more research on that particular issue and sort of try and line that up with engineering standards.
Yeah, so I will do a little bit more digging, but real quick off the top of my searching here, it says driveways giving direct access onto arterials may be denied if alternate access is available. We also do, as we were talking about earlier with the backing, we prohibit backing onto the sidewalk from commercial driveways, but we don't on residential. So we'll do a little bit more digging, marrying up between this code and the engineering standard.
And then number 6 below this, you'd question some of that, but I assume this all goes away with our standardization of 50 or 12 spaces.
Number 6, let's see, what did I say? Oh, a cluster, no definition.
This just says there has to be a buffer between every 50 spaces, and I think we've decided we're going to make that 12.
Well, there would be a landscape island every 12 spaces, but the way I read this standard, it's saying that, essentially every 50 spaces in a parking lot, you have to sort of close that off as a separate parking area, so to speak, and then ring it with landscaping that's 20 feet wide. And so that one, and I'm not a big fan of large parking lots, so let me just start by saying that. And so I see kind of what the intent of this is here. But the problem I see with this is that, number one, 50 spaces for a commercial development is not very much for standard type, general commercial, retail commercial type developments, which the center doesn't have too much of that at this point, but maybe at some point in the future, at the junction, you'll get something like that. And so, number one, I don't know what a cluster is. I guess it's 50 contiguous spaces. So there's no definition of that. And then so the second problem with this is 20 feet is just too wide. 20 feet is like the largest buffer between incompatible uses that you have in the landscape code, like between industrial and residential, for instance, would require a 20-foot buffer. And so you're saying you need that between parking areas. So if we want to have the idea of clustered parking, I think that that's fine, but I would at a minimum reduce the buffer between these areas to maybe 10 feet, something like that, to give a little bit greater flexibility.
Well, but I guess that's what our other code that we're talking about, 12 spaces will have a landscape buffer. That is to break up a huge expanse of parking lot, and I don't I'm not sure why we need something different here in multifamily parking. Secondly, the city didn't apply that to the apartments going in and out at Riverside. They don't have any 20-foot buffer between every 50 parking spaces.
Yeah, and I'd have to look back. I don't know if that's a function of the development agreement or something, or what that was, but you're right. I don't think that they applied that there.
So to me, I just don't understand why this is different than the general discussion we had earlier about a parking space buffer, certainly smaller than 20 feet between every 12 spaces.
Well, I think a buffer is different than a landscaped island. A buffer is like something that would almost completely enclose one of these clusters, is the way it sounds like this is written to me. So you would essentially have smaller parking areas within a larger parking lot, is kind of what this is trying to do. Does that make sense versus a landscape island?
But if that's important to us, why aren't we applying that to the junction as an example, where we know we're going to have larger expanses of parking lot?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's fairly restrictive, and I've never seen a standard comparable to this before. So I would suggest perhaps upping the number of spaces in a cluster to give a little bit more flexibility, and then reducing the buffering requirements to 10 feet wide between parking clusters. What would be the thoughts on that?
Well, so that would apply to multifamily?
I mean, yeah, I mean, because this is in the multifamily section, but I think we could take it out of this section and make it a more general design requirement for these larger parking lots.
I would agree with that. I just find it strange that there is this requirement on multifamily, and we've gone to this other requirement for commercial and other residential areas of 12 with a landscape buffer.
Well, so I guess I would suggest taking this into the more general design requirements section up above. The landscape island requirement, not buffering, but the landscape island requirement would still remain the same. So within a larger parking lot, every 75 spaces would have to have a landscape buffer between the next 75 spaces, for instance. And then within the 75 space cluster, you'd still have to have landscape islands every 12 spaces. Does that make sense?
Ethan, this is Dennis. Is it possible between now and our next meeting, because we're not going to obviously finish this tonight or vote on it, is it possible that you or one of your staff members could put together a layout that would depict what may look like based on these numbers, so we could actually see a pictorial picture of what that might look like under these rules of 50 continuous and 10-foot wide parking clusters and so on, as well as the 12-foot, every 12 spaces having a break in the parking. I personally would be beneficial to see something that we could actually stare at and say, oh, okay, that's what you're talking about. That's what that might look like. That would certainly help me. Does that make sense or not?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think we wouldn't have to go to too much artistic effort to illustrate this.
Right, not at all.
So that we know, so that we all understand what it is that we're all on the same page, understand what it is that we're talking about.
Yeah, Dennis, I was thinking the same thing, but I was thinking from the perspective of looking at some existing parking lots. I just called up a satellite view of A. and their big parking lot, they've got these little islands that separate 20 parking spaces. And that looks like the separators don't do much to break up the huge parking lot view there. So maybe some examples of some other parking lots that have different numbers of parking spaces might help visualize that also.
Mm-hmm.
And we're not only talking about numbers, we're talking about clusters, we're talking about contiguous, we're talking about all these engineering terminology, perhaps, that us planning commissioners could better landscape buffer and so on. So if that's possible, I would certainly encourage you, Ethan, to help us out with that.
Okay. Yep, I can help out with that. And I think perhaps my recommendation at this point would be to sort of leave the discussion here because there's quite a bit going on in this multifamily section, and we can pick it up again here next month. And then we could, if Planning Commission is agreeable to it, we could start talking about archaeology a little bit.
I'm definitely okay moving on. And Ethan, I was also going to offer up, and it's probably premature, but if you needed to work with one of us or two of us in a working session, you know, I could help facilitate that, but probably a little early.
Okay. Yeah, I'll give that some thought and reach out.
And actually, we'll save it for what you put together, but I did do parking lot island design at images.google.com, and very helpful, but we don't have to distract from here. But I'm okay moving on to archaeology. Is everyone else agreeable to that?
Sure.
Yes.
I'm okay.
All right. Let's move it forward in that case.
Okay, so this is a brand new topic. It was on your agenda last month, but we tabled it and didn't talk about it at that point. And so it's also an item that's on the Planning Commission's priority list of code updates to accomplish this year. It's in your work plan. And so this memo that you have here in front of you gives you some general overview of what the archaeology issue is. The city has an existing archaeology code in 18.360, which is a good thing. Most jurisdictions, La Center size at least, do not have an archaeological protection code. And so it's been in place since I think about 2011 or so. A lot has happened across the state of Washington in the last roughly decade or so dealing with archaeology. It's become a more and more important issue. And the requirements of developers and cities to ensure that archaeological resources are protected are getting increasingly more common and more protective of those resources. So, and that's partly a product of involvement by tribal governments at the state level, but also just jurisdictions and developers and so forth finding these resources more and more commonly, and that includes in La Center. I don't think La Center's had major finds before, but certainly in the context of pre-development studies, there have been archaeological resources identified in various locations throughout La Center. And if you look at a map, if you pull up Clark County maps online, I'm not sure if you're used to using that or not, but you can pull up an archaeological predictive model and it'll show you what the relative risk is of encountering resources on a given project site, but also citywide what those risks are. And La Center's risk is fairly high. It's usually moderate to high throughout, pretty much the entire city. And that's kind of a function of being close to the Lewis River and there being a lot of other streams and minor water bodies in the city where there could have been settlements or Native Americans gathered for various reasons. So the city is obligated to protect these resources, and it has the existing code. But then, in addition to the existing code, the city's SEPA requirements, State Environmental Policy Act requirements, also help protect those resources. And so, anytime there's development that triggers the need for a SEPA review, SEPA environmental review, then a developer files a SEPA checklist, and then the city uses that checklist to review what the probability is of encountering archaeological resources on a given project site. And we notice the local tribal governments in that process and give them an opportunity to comment on SEPAs. And then, if there is a moderate or higher risk of encountering resources, we typically require developers to file what's called an archaeological predetermination report, and that kind of further drills down on what the risk is of encountering a particular or of encountering archaeological resources on a particular site. And then depending on what that archaeological predetermination report says, then the developer might be required to undertake a full survey if there's a known archaeological site within the boundaries of their development. And then in that case, they would have to more thoroughly document what that site is, what the proposed development's impact is would be to that archaeological site. I guess the issue with the city's existing archaeological code, there's a couple of bigger issues with it. One is that there's some inconsistency in when predetermination reports are required. There's a table, if you look at the definitions in the Archaeological Protection Code, there's a table that gives you kind of the probability of encountering archaeological resources and when a predetermination report is required. So I think, Jess, if we scroll first of all to page 2 of the memo here. Just wanted to point out, this is the map that I'm talking about of La Center here. City boundaries aren't called out very well, but you can see that with those sort of darker pink colors, those are the higher probabilities of encountering archaeological resources. So you can see, like in the bottomlands in particular, in areas surrounding that, there's a medium high to high risk of encountering resources. But then in other locations throughout the city, there's a fairly high risk. It's usually moderate or above, not as often low, a low probability. So go ahead and go to the next page after this one. And so the sort of bullets that you see here in front of you are one section of the code that talks about when a predetermination report is required, and it says when any portion or where any portion of the disturbance area is at least partially within predictive class 5, which is the high probability category, then you have to do a predetermination report. Or for any non-exempt ground disturbing action or activity for which a permit or approval is required and where the disturbance area is at least 5 acres in size and wholly within predictive class 4. And then for any non-exempt ground disturbing action or activity for which a permit or approval is required where the disturbance area is proposed within a quarter mile of a known recorded archaeological site. When the city planner determines that reliable, credible information indicates the probable existence of an archaeological site. When an item of archaeological interest is discovered during the course of a permitted or approved ground disturbing action. So you have those circumstances when a predetermination report is required. But then if, as I said, there's an inconsistency. So Jess, if you scroll to the next page, and this table that's taken out of the code provides, a different set of thresholds for when a predetermination report is required. And these look a little more familiar in terms of what I'm used to seeing across the state of Washington. And so essentially what this says is if in that left-hand column there, that's the predictive class, that's the risk of category of encountering archaeological resources. So 5 is high and 1 is low. If you're in class 3 or higher and you have a moderate or high impact development, then you're required to do a predetermination report. So those are slightly different thresholds than we just got done reading. So one of the objectives of updating the archaeological code would be to marry those up and work with the Washington Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation and other agencies that have information on archaeology to come up with a system that's more consistent. So that's one issue. And then it's worth noting, I mean, we took a look at San Juan County's code, and they have a slightly different predetermination process. I'm not necessarily recommending that we go there, but they have a predetermination process where staff looks at confidential maps that are available from the state and tells the developer when a predetermination report is required. I'm not particularly in favor of that type of a system because the city has to sign a memorandum with the Washington Department of Archaeology and Historic Preservation to get that data, and then the city's kind of responsible for how it uses that data and what it tells developers. So in other words, the city's taking on quite a bit of risk when it does that versus these kind of more general predetermination requirements, which put the onus a little bit more on the developer. So that's just something I wanted to note that, from San Juan County's code that we wouldn't necessarily want to do. Another issue is notification of tribes and other parties in the code. The existing code puts the onus upon the tribes to sign up to receive information on archaeology, like when a developer submits an application to the city, then the tribe can, if it's on the city's list, could call and request that information or to be notified of that information. And so I guess the issues that presents is, number one, the city's not supposed to be distributing archaeological information. And so I'd suggest updating this code section to make it clear that that the city can notify the tribes, but we're not going to provide the archaeological information. That information is available to them through the Washington Department of Archaeology, which maintains a database. And so anytime a predetermination report or a survey report is completed, then those get uploaded to the department's database, and then those are available to registered, tribes within Washington, and they can download those. So my only point there is that the city can't, because archaeological information is confidential, it can't distribute that information to anyone, including tribal governments, and so that needs to be made clear in the code as well. Any questions so far? I know this is kind of a little bit of a topic that's somewhat difficult to understand.
Ethan, what is a non-exempt ground disturbance? I think that was the term that was used.
Yeah, I mean, there's a section of the code that talks about when it applies, you know, similar to other codes that we look at. There's an applicability and exemption section. In the exemption section in the code sort of lines out what uses aren't subject to the archaeological protection code. So that's, you know, kind of a general answer on that. I can pull.
I see that now. Thank you.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, this predetermination, is there a specific set of guidelines the developer has to comply with, other than just going out and digging some holes and taking some pictures?
Yeah, there's specific requirements in the code for what a predetermination report has to contain. You know, we could pull those up and talk about those too, but one of the goals of this code update would be to sort of verify that there isn't, you know, that those predetermination report requirements are adequate and that there isn't anything else that they should be providing.
That's all done under the purview of the contractor, and he just reports on his actions.
Are you asking the question about the developer's contractor?
Well, yeah, excuse me, the developer. You're saying the developer can go do this predetermination, and he has to meet these requirements, which I see here now, these standards. Does the city participate in that activity?
Well, so developers, the way that the city participates in it is that at the time of pre-app, usually pre-app, if the development is proposed in a moderate to high risk area, then the city will usually require a predetermination report if it meets, you know, if it meets some of those thresholds that we talked about. Then the developer goes out and hires an archaeologist, and you have to be a certified archaeologist within the state of Washington to complete those reports. And then the archaeologist goes out on site, they walk the site looking for indicators of archaeology. They typically dig what are called shovel test pits, you know, that go down a couple feet to look at what the indicators are of archaeology on the site. And then they also review existing databases, DAPS database, to see if there's any documented archaeological sites or finds on the project site or in the vicinity of it. And then based upon those things, they recommend whether a full survey is advisable or not. And so if there's a site, if they discover a site during the predetermination process, then they're typically going to advise that a full survey be done, especially if the development, you know, is going to impact that area. There's going to be ground disturbing activities or whatever over those areas. And then that survey report would then set up mitigations, like having an archaeologist on site during construction to monitor what's going on, you know, so if something is discovered during construction, that they can stop and see what it is and decide whether to proceed or whether they need to get a permit to excavate further, or sometimes it's just setting up a boundary of an area where no one can conduct any ground disturbing activities. I'm sure Brian has experience with this.
Oh, that's I understand. I just I had the impression initially that predetermination was something that the developer went out and did on his own. But there is some structure to it, and there is some oversight in what the developer is doing. So that's fine.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's pretty important stuff because, I mean, not only for developers, but for the city, because, I mean, if you think about it, the city is a type of developer too, in terms of developing roads and utilities and that sort of thing. And so the city, you know, frequently has to comply with its own requirements. Okay, I'm almost out of breath here tonight. And you're probably almost out of ears for this, but so I guess the last sort of category that we identified of things that might need to change, Jess, is on the next page, is the city's inadvertent discovery language, and DAP provides some examples of what that needs to say, and so that's basically just sort of a swapping out the city's inadvertent discovery language and making sure that that meets DAP standards. So those are kind of the three areas at this point, at least, that we're recommending making some changes. And I'll open it up to any more questions or comments again, and probably come back next month with some more specifics on some of these items, assuming we can dig up some good guidance.
Definitely seems like a worthwhile thing to, something we're streamlining, consolidating, removing inconsistencies. So it's definitely something we should add to the list. So thanks for bringing this to our attention.
Mm-hmm.
Ethan, Dennis here. Are you then indicating that next month perhaps you would come to us with a red line of our existing code and with the potential or suggested changes?
It might be that, or it might be some more specific recommendations than what I'm providing here.
Okay.
It's kind of an amazing thing, but we're not finding a lot of great guidance out there from the state of Washington or others about archaeological protection codes. So we're having to dig a little bit deeper on this stuff, and that may take a little bit longer than I was initially expecting to sort of get to a draft red line code. So we might come back with some more specific recommendations fleshed out, but perhaps not a red line code just yet.
Is this something that needs to be done this year, completed this year?
I mean, the goal is to, you know, it's on, as I said, it's on the Planning Commission's list of priority code updates. There's nothing in particular driving it, I guess, other than just sort of risk to the city and things I'm noticing during project review about, you know, some of these inconsistencies I'm bringing up that would be good to sort of close those inconsistencies so that there's a reduced risk to the city that, you know, something happens inadvertently. And
that has merit. That has merit for sure.
Yeah. So definitely the goal would be to finish it this year.
Okay.
Okay. Well, if there's no other questions, I think that's all from me, at least on this topic.
All right. Thank you, Ethan. Appreciate it. With that, we don't have any new business on the agenda, but did anyone want to bring forward new business?
Sharon, Dennis here. I was approached by by a member of our community, and he was asking whether or not the Planning Commission could be involved with, or would there be an involvement? As our understanding is that the tribe, Cowlitz, has purchased the 3B property this past year, and then also just recently purchased the Fudge property at the junction, and have been there's been some discussion going on that they're going to be trying to bring that into tribal trust, and whether or not the Planning Commission would have any action or any input or on that particular subject. Would you know that that would be appropriate for anything to happen within the Planning Commission on that subject, Ethan?
I don't know because I don't know what, I haven't been involved with those conversations, so I don't know exactly what the nature of all of that is. I don't know if Brian's been brought up to speed yet on any of that stuff, but you know, if I do know that the city has an existing development agreement with the tribe that prohibits them from taking land into trust, additional land into trust on the east side of the freeway. And so it sounds like they're possibly looking to change that, which means that there might be a development agreement that comes, you know, at a minimum before city council at some point in the future. I'm not completely sure if Planning Commission would be involved or not. Brian, if you have any background on this issue or input.
No, you've summed up about the extent of my knowledge. There is that existing development agreement that prohibits it. I know that there's some discussions that are maybe just beginning about potentially talking about considering reopening that, but beyond that, I don't think it's gone anywhere. Certainly, as you said, that would have to go through the city council. I don't have a great sense at this point of, you know, where that is. I'm just, like I said, getting up to speed here on the topic myself, but yeah, that's something that we could maybe come back to Planning Commission with a little bit more information on as that situation develops.
Ethan, thank you. I indicated to this individual that I did not believe that this would be under the jurisdiction of the Planning Commission, but I would be would in fact though mention it at our meeting. So I wanted to follow through and do that as well. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for bringing that up, Dennis. And thanks for the input from Ethan and Brian on that. Any other new business that anyone would like to put forward tonight? All right. Hearing none. Ethan, do you mind helping us out with the community development report?
Sure thing. There's a lot going on right now. So let's see here. Maybe Jess can keep the map in front of her and I'll pull up the list. Let's see. Sorry, 1 second. Okay, so Lockwood Creek subdivision, which is item number 1. They submitted an application February 1st. That's currently under review, is deemed complete on February 15th. So staff is reviewing that subdivision application. I think it's for 71 lots. Let's see here. Not going to hit on all of this, but Riverside Estates, the phase 2 plat, that's item number 12. Phase 2 plat is under review, final plat. They've been given 1 round of comments, and I believe that they just submitted their resubmitted their plat addressing our comments. So we're going through the plat review process with them. And then we've mentioned in previous months, item number 21 is the Tappanee Carlson commercial. project, which is a landscaping, commercial landscaping supply business that would be located in that area. And they're looking to obtain a temporary use permit for approximately 1 year to place that business there. And then at that point, they would decide whether or not that business becomes permanent. Of course, they'd have to go through the city's review process again if it became a permanent business, or if they would move it to some other location within the city. So we're, you know, in the middle of that review. And then the item 23 is a new Clark Public Utilities flow station. I think I mentioned that one last month. So there's an existing below ground flow station there that lets water into the city's water system when reservoir reaches a certain level. They're looking to bring that flow station above ground in a small masonry building. And then item number 24 is the ACES View subdivision, which is just east of the, would be just east of the new middle school there. That's a, let's see, what is it? A 69 lot, proposed 69 lot subdivision. We had a pre-application meeting with them on February 2nd. We've not seen a formal preliminary plat application submitted by them yet, but we've heard that they might be submitting that. Then there's the La Center, number 25, the La Center High School Green Shed project, which is essentially a gardening shed that would be located next to their existing gardens and above the parking lot there. We had a pre-application meeting with them in the middle of February. They've not filed a formal application yet. And then item number 26 was the pre-application meeting that Brian and I were involved in earlier today, which would be a new 39 lot single family detached subdivision just east of the high school there on that approximately 12 acre site. And so, yeah, just at pre-app on that one. And so there's no formal submittal coming in on that one yet. So that's kind of the major activity. It is busy for sure. Cities has a number of different applications it's looking at. And then, just in terms of the potential for upcoming development across those residential development that we talked about in items 24 and 26, and item 1 in that kind of eastern quadrant of the city. You're talking about roughly, what is that, 110 plus 70 lots. So you're talking about 180, 190 lots across those 3 developments there. So a lot of things happening and a lot of potential growth with those applications. Any questions on that stuff?
Ethan, are both the ACES and Manning subdivisions LDR zone?
Yes. Yep. And so is Lockwood Meadows, item 1.
I knew that one was.
Any other questions for Ethan on the development staff report? Thanks, Ethan, as always, for taking us through that. Definitely a lot going on. And I'm going to move into Planning Commissioner alternate comment. This is just a chance for commissioners to say anything they want. So I'm going to go in the order I see you on my screen. So Commissioner Hill.
All right, thank you, Sharon, thank you. And just again, welcome Justin Keeler, and also appreciate Brian joining us this evening. And Ethan, again, great job as usual. And I know we continue to ask you to do more and more, but we hope that doesn't somehow discourage you, but we appreciate you just helping us to be better prepared to make the right decisions as we go forward. So again, thanks for all your all your efforts and work. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Appreciate the kind words. Thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner Hill. Commissioner Nutbrock, any comment?
Does anybody know if the tea leaves are such that we're going to be able to meet face to face next month?
I wanted to
That'd be nice.
bring that up. It feels like the answer is yes to me, and I asked, maybe Jess has some more information on this, but I asked Jess to reach out to the mayor, to see if that would be a possibility, and I'm assuming we would meet in the new City Hall Council chambers there. Are those done? Are you guys, are we still in the old council chambers for in-person meetings? I'm not even sure.
Yeah, so it would be, we've got the nice TVs up. I think because of COVID, we will have to still have it set up to be hybrid. And because of the nature of that, I think we're just still making sure we can have it so if someone wants to be at home while doing it, that's still available. So I think there's a few technology things to figure out. But I would put our hopes into going into person, with us being the guinea pigs, meaning Planning Commission before City Council goes. But I have not heard a 100% yes from anyone at the city yet, but I imagine senior staff will be, including Brian, will be making that decision soon, hopefully.
Yeah, Jessica, that follows my understanding too, that we're still implementing the technology, but the hope is that it's done at the end of this month. So barring a successful test, we would probably be the first with this group to test it out in an official public meeting.
Great. I look forward to getting back face to face.
I do too.
Yeah, that would be nice. Commissioner Smith, any comments?
Oh, thanks, Ethan and everybody, and Justin. Thanks for volunteering to be a part of our group. And I'll look forward to meeting you, and look forward to seeing everybody next month, hopefully. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you. Commissioner Keeler, any comment?
Well, I wanted to thank Ethan for his detailed walkthrough, especially on the parking requirements. I have a lot to learn, and I will be reaching out to you, Chair El-Kashari, for some assistance. And I'm happy to be here.
Excellent. And thanks for being here. And Brian, I know you're not a commissioner. You do way more work than we do, but any comment from you? Just kind of bring you into the fold since you were kind enough to stick it out with us tonight.
Nope, no comments from me this evening. Been enjoying watching how this group works and interacts. Very impressed.
Excellent, thank you. And I'll throw my comment in there. I know on the hybrid meetings, I think the challenge is, as I've done it in other places historically, there's a tendency for the folks that are face-to-face physically. It's very easy to overwhelm or over talk the folks that are virtual, so that you've got someone virtual kind of like yelling in the wind, and the folks in the room are really interacting well, and the virtual people are kind of left out, is my experience. So I definitely appreciate us, the city, working on the tech to make it democratic, I'll say. So with that, I'm going to, so maybe in the future, the next regular agenda and work session in 1.13, maybe we can consolidate those line items. Maybe I'll get with Jess on that, because I've just been either texting or harassing folks by phone to confirm attendance. But if no one has like a specific thing that's going to keep them away, we could probably roll to adjournment, unless someone wants to throw something out about availability really quick. All right. Sorry.
I move adjourned.
Say that one more time. I cut you off.
I move that we adjourn.
I'll second it.
All right. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All right.
Bye.
We are adjourned. Thank you so much. And welcome, Commissioner Keeler. Welcome, Brian. I'm sure we'll cross paths really soon. And Ethan, as usual, thank you very much for all that you do. You really make technical things easy for a computer nerd like me to understand. So
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank
take
you.
care, everyone.
Night.
Good
Thank
night.
you.